At some particular point in your life personally, you're going to run across persons who are going to come to you and say something, and they're going to look to you to convince them otherwise. Now, they may not specifically say, hey, come over here and convince me. But what they're going to do is they're going to give you certain words and key words and phrases that lets you know that they are looking for you to convince them that their course of action they're about to take or their mindset about something is wrong or should be changed. But there's something that you need to be aware of whenever you're dealing with this. And there's 3 things that I want you to be mindful of when you decide to take on the activity of trying to convince someone that you know that their perspective should be looked at in a different way. First, you don't know all the variables. Why am I saying that? Well, a lot of times what happens if somebody comes to you and says, you know what, I'm thinking about doing this. I don't really want to do it, but maybe I'm wrong. Could you kind of tell me what your thoughts are? Well, they've already led off with telling you where they stand. But what they haven't told you is all of the reasons why they feel that way. And the bad part about it is that a lot of times they don't share with you everything. So what ends up happening is that when you start inquiring a little bit more so that you can get a better idea of whether to either convince them or affirm what they're saying, if they don't share with you all of the variables that they're taking in consideration, what happens is that you're moving and making decisions and making inputs and guidance to them with limited information because they have not shared with you all of the information. So you can only provide feedback on the information that they provide you. So what ends up happening is that when they sit here and they tell you, I don't want to do something, I don't think I should do this, I'm going to do this, but I really don't want to. When they come to you because they're expecting you to provide your feedback to convince them of why what they're doing is either right or affirming why it's wrong, if they don't tell you all of the variables that they're thinking about and all the factors that they're taking into consideration, it does a disservice to you because you're only providing information and responses based on the limited information that you have in front of you. Second thing, you don't know how high the standard is. And you're like, what do you mean by how high the standard is? If someone is telling you from a particular standpoint that this is what they don't want and they are looking for you to convince them otherwise, if their standard is really high, you may be going through an exercise of giving them 1,000 different reasons why this is not the right course of action or why they should do a different course of action. But if their standard is so high, it doesn't matter what you say, then what you've done is you've effectively spent a lot of time, either 1, affirming that their impression was correct, or 2, not being disrespectful. You've expended a lot of your time basically trying to chop down a tree that wasn't going to fall to begin with. In other words, if they've already decided this is a deal breaker for me, which is why I don't want to do this, then if they don't tell you that, or if you don't know that, then what you're now doing is you're engaging in this activity where you're basically it's an exercise of futility is what we often call it. Basically, you're wasting your time because they've already said, this is my deal breaker. Well, if that's your deal breaker, then anything I say doesn't matter because what you're effectively telling me is that whatever I say, it's not going to change the fact that this is the deal breaker. But most times they don't tell you that. So what ends up happening is that the person hasn't shared with you that this is the thing that is so significant that there's nothing you can say. They'll never say that because they know if they tell you that, then there's no need for you to get into this argument. So what ends up happening is that they tell you this, not letting you know the degree of significance of importance of it. And as a result, you spend an inordinate amount of time, a whole lot of time, going through this exercise of talking to them about A, B, C, D, and E as to why they should look at this a different way, not knowing that the bar is so high, there's no way that you could overcome it. Third and finally, they're just looking for counter arguments. There are going to be people who come to you, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. They've already made their mind up. They've already decided that this is the course of action. So they're not looking for you to convince them. They're looking for you to give counter arguments. So what happens is that they don't tell you this. And this is the part where it gets a little wonky. They don't tell you that this is where they're coming from. What they do is they come to you and they say, hey, I'm thinking about what's your thought, man? I really think ABC. What do you think? But what they don't tell you is that they've already decided that this is the course of action they want, but they want to be able to prepare to address anyone who has concerns about it or want to bring up something to them in the future. And since they haven't accounted for every potential counter argument that might come their way, they're expecting you to throw out as many counter arguments as possible. So this way, when it finally comes and they have to address it, they now have a response for each and every one of those. Now, again, if you're going into this knowing that that's what they want from you, then you don't have a problem with it, that's not a problem. I've been in positions where I've done this before, where people have said to me, hey, listen, I'm trying to figure out how to address this and so forth. Give me some thoughts I hadn't thought about. That's telling me that you're respecting the fact that, hey, if you got the time, can you share that with me? But a lot of times people don't do that. So what ends up happening is that you get into this discussion where they have basically taken this whole song and dance of telling you, this is where I'm thinking, what are your thoughts? Giving you the impression that they value your opinion, but not telling you that they want to use your time to gather counterpoints to use for their benefit later. But instead of telling you that's what they're going to do, they leave that out of the discussion. And so as a result, you've now gone through this exercise where when you finally see what they do, they end up doing exactly what they intended to do to begin with. And you now have this feeling that, man, I've wasted all this time, where at the end of the day, they only were looking for counter arguments for whatever anybody would say. If you are dealing with someone who wants you to convince them of something, it can be an exhausting exercise, but it's an exercise that you choose. In other words, depending on your relationship with the person, you have to tell yourself, are you agreeable to spending the energy that it's going to take to engage someone to change their mind or give them a different perspective? Am I telling you you should walk away when this happens? That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that I want you to be mindful of the reality that when you find yourself in a position where you're dealing with someone who leads off or gives you that energy that they are looking to be convinced, you have to make a quick decision of whether you want to spend your time and energy going through an exercise that ultimately is designed to benefit them. But if they've not included all the things that I've talked about in terms of all of the different factors, how important the things are, whether they're just looking for counter arguments, then what they're effectively telling you is that they want to take advantage of your time, but not respect your time by telling you that's what they're doing. So know this ahead of time. A lot of this is relationship building, because a lot of times you'll have relationships with people and you know that's what's going on when you have these communications. But if you're dealing with someone and you're not quite sure, find out early on how much of this exercise is going to be an expense of your time as opposed to something that could benefit them as opposed to benefiting you.